Yeah, I probably shouldn't do that. Hey everyone, Steve here from PC Budget Solutions, and I'm back with a budget solution. Let me give you guys it's not going to be too long to read. So, a company by the name of PC Cooler reached out back in November and said, hey, we have these really cool RGB fans. Do you want to review them? I said, sure, send one over to me. They said, it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get them over from China. How about you work from Amazon and we'll, reimburse you? I'll get back to you. So it's January. I got back to them and said, you know what? I'm in the market for these fans. So worst case scenario, I buy a set of $30 fans that don't work that well, that are RGB, that I'll put into a system that doesn't have obstructive cooling, that can benefit from more airflow fans, and I'm not really losing a lot of money. Worst case scenario. Best case scenario, they do reimburse me. These fans turn out to be good, and then they end up on my basically inventory SKU list in the future. So to say that I'm not super optimistic, but I am excited, is pretty accurate. So we have a set of basically $30 to $35 fans. It comes with 3 of them. It comes with an RGB controller and an RGB 5-volt addressable connector, as well as a fan splitter, 3-to-1. Some really useful things, as well as fan screws, that you're going to need when using these fans. Now, I ran a bunch of different kind of tests, because that's what I do. I put these on my 360mm radiator, my Fractal Design S336, replacing my Fractal Design Venturi fans that have a 2.3 H2O per millimeter static pressure rating at max RPM. I think it's around 1800. These also max out, I think, right around, I think it's 1800? Yes, 1800, because they are PWM. Great. So I think they'll probably do a little bit worse, but if they're just a little bit worse, that's honestly perfectly fine. Those are $15, $16 fans that are on RGB. Next, I'm going to put it on an open test bench with an overclocked i5, and I'm going to also do some configurations with push-pull, compare Cooler Master, air balanced RGB fans, and the stock GAMAX 400 fan. So there's going to be 5 different tests there. Then lastly, we're going in the hot box. We're going in the HB600L. That is a water-cooled stock i3, and we're going to run both CPU and GPU. That's stock, obviously. And I will urge you guys to pay attention to my configurations and my testing conditions, because they're all a little bit different from test to test. But when I test the different fans, I keep obviously the conditions the same. And I do it because that is kind of just how I wanted to move forward with it. For example, my CPU fan curve on my system is modified, it's changed, whereas the other systems are on stock curves. GPU, I use the exact same fan curve for all of them, because that's the one that I normally do. So pay attention to that. Let's see if these can end up on my inventory list. So this is the front, nothing super fancy. They're the Corona. They're 120mm PWM fans. It does say FRGB. I'm not entirely sure what the heck that means, but regardless, it does move a fair bit of air. I didn't want anything north of 1800 RPM. And we slide to the back, it is in multiple languages, but it again tells you, maximum dBA is 31.4 dBA at plus or minus 10%. They are rated for 12 volts. They do move 54 CFM. So again, I don't want something super loud. So let's see how the unboxing experience is. So these are actually purchased directly from Amazon. And I purchased them from Amazon because that was the fastest way to get it for me. So let's see what this comes with here. So first things first is we have, this is most likely some sort of RGB controller. And then we have several. This also could be an RGB controller as well. So let's take a look here. So we're going to see how all these plug in. Here is a three fan to 1 header, so that's definitely useful. Let's take a look at one of these fans here. So one of the things I did like about these fans is we have an LED around here and an LED around here. Now looking over, what I like to see, it does have a fair bit more blades than I was kind of expecting, but it definitely looks balanced because they're more on an angle. They're not super flat where you see a lot of the pressurized fans, but they're not super open. So when they say they're air balanced, I expect them to perform decently, where we're not going to see a huge difference, especially slapping them on a radiator trying to pull them in. The reason why I want to do a radiator test is because it'll give me a good idea going forward if I can use these on front panels that are slightly obstructed. This is pretty cool. So we definitely have a sleeved cable here. So we also have two pieces. So this kind of answers my question here, is we're going to plug these into here, it looks like. Oops, I had it upside down here. Yes. So these will plug in like this. And this looks to be essentially a 3-in-1 RGB header. It looks like you can daisy chain these too. So there's a couple ways you can do this, but this does look to favor a 5-volt, not a 12-volt. But yeah. So, but what I'm interested in personally is working with the Molex connector. I like addressable, don't get me wrong, but I want to put these in systems that are a little bit older, that are like 5th and 6th gen. We also get fan screws for all of them, which is good. Nothing super amazing. Now what I want to do is I'm going to grab a test bench over here and we're just going to like fire it up and see what it does. So what I've done, just to show you guys here, is the connector itself allows you to daisy chain into another RGB connector. But what we're going to do is we're going to go directly into, plug this back on, I just don't want to mess with that, is we're going to go directly into this little mechanism here, and then we're going to go directly into Molex and see what happens. It's very important we keep this flat whenever we go to do this. Oh, I saw a little bit of, okay. So, we don't have any power, which is perfectly fine. I'm not really worried about that at the moment. It does take PWM power. So, let's take a look at different modes we can do here. So, here you can see it's kind of running in a rainbow. We have mode, speed, and light. This is what I want. And the cool thing is it shows up on both. So this is exactly the kind of fan that I want, because this allows you to control it by the header, and then we can change, I think we can change color here, yes. So you guys can see here, that is exactly what I'm looking for. Just kind of cycling through different modes here. That's cool. So this is really neat where I can maybe like use two-way double-sided sticky tape and put this on the back. So now is the big test, and that is we want to see the performance of this on a radiator. And the reason why that's important is because that will give us a pretty good idea on what to expect with obstruction of front panels. So we are looking at a couple different fans here today. So let me make sure we have we do have a duplicate here. So we're looking at a total of 5 fans. And one of them you don't see here. It is a Fractal Design Venturi fan with PWM, but we do have the Lee & Lee Bore Light RGB. We do indeed have the PC Kohler RGB fan. Note that only that part's RGB. We have the Air Balanced or ARGB fan from Kohler Master. And then this guy's making its appearance here. It is just a blue LED fan from Deep Cool that comes on the Gammax 400. Couple things to note. So this is relatively light. It's a good fan. I mean, you guys saw my Kohler Showdown. It has PWM, but it's relatively light and very much plastic. Again, this is very similar. Pretty light, I would say a tad heavier, if anything, than the Deep Cool fan, but the Kohler Master one is relatively light. Then we have the Bora Light. A little bit heavier. It does have some metal in it, so it definitely has a fair bit of heft. You can actually see some of the metal right here, and actually part of its frame is definitely metal as well. So it is a little bit heavier, but it is definitely interesting to note that these are definitely manufactured in China. This is probably the heaviest of all of them, and it definitely might have metal in it, but the exterior is plastic. And one thing I like is it does have these pads here. So, you're not going to be compressing as much whenever you actually screw it in. The Venturi fans do have that, but notice they're absent from the rest of these. So, you know, these fans I think were $35 or $36 for 3 of them. The heaviest fan, definitely the blade design looks the best. So when you look on the back here, we have slotted grooves. That's going to help with a little bit more pressure. The Bora Light fans, you know, these I'm not really expecting to do much. And then the Cooler Master fans, just, you know, plastic. So from a build perspective, I actually expect these to win out. I'm not sure what the Venturi fans, they're back in my system. It is a pain to do that radiator, so I do already have some results there. But let's go ahead, let's take a look at the results. We're going to be comparing the following. We're going to be comparing this fan versus the Bora Light in a i3 system in a case that doesn't have really good airflow on top of an AIO. We're going to be comparing the Cooler Master in push-pull versus the Deep Cool fan, all on the same all on the same heatsink. And then I'm going to slap 3 of these on my Celsius S36, and we're going to do a couple of different tests there. So a lot of different style testing, open bench, liquid cool for intake, liquid cool for exhaust. So you guys will get a pretty wide range of results. So first, we're going to take a look at putting on my Ryzen system and see how well these perform. So let's take a look at the PC Cooler Corona RGB fans. They cost about $35. You get a set of 3, including what we already see. Max RPMs around 1800 RPM, so not super loud. Can move about 54.5 cubic feet per minute of air, so a fair bit. Noise is just a hair over 31 dBA. Maximum pressure is unknown, so that's very important because that, in this day and age with how cases are designed with glass front panels, and there's not a lot of mesh and free flowing to move air, so this is going to be very important. Let's take a look at the challengers next. So taking a look at the challengers here, we do have the Fractal Design Venturi fan. They run about $13 each, same RPM 1800 max. They move a little bit more air, about 61.5. Noise is about the same, and maximum stack pressure is 2.3 H2O per millimeter. The Lee & Lee Bora Light fans, not really as impressive, all things considered. They're $40 for the set of 3. Their RPM is lower, which obviously in turns they'll probably move less air. They'll be a little bit quieter, but a lot less pressure. These are definitely not pressure optimized fans. Now, lastly, we have the Cooler Master Fan Pro 120. They are air balanced and also RGB. They run $20 a piece or $60 for the set. Their RPM caps out 1300. Her list is plus or minus 10%. Noise, they say, is low, but they make a really weird chirping noise at max speed. I've run into this with all their Master Fan Pro series, so not a fan. Well, they are a fan, but I'm not a fan. And stack pressure is real low, less than 1, 0.96 plus or minus 10%. So not really expecting a lot out of these fans. Let's take a look at the generally accepted conditions. Then we'll start looking at the test benches and individual test conditions. So these are the assumptions that can be made for all the tests. And that is, I normalize all the testing to 20 degrees ambient. So if the temperature was higher than 20 degrees ambient, I adjust the temperature down. If the ambient temperature was lower than 20 degrees, I adjust the end result up. Ambient temperature is measured at the front of the case, except for test Series 2, which is measured relatively close to the heatsink. All temperatures are measured in degrees Celsius. Lower is better. I cannot say enough. If the temperature is higher, that's not good. All temperatures are based off the second hottest core, except for the AMD systems. They only have one measurement, called the node, and IDA64s ran for about 25 to 30 minutes. The liquid would heat up right around 15 and would not really increase after that, but we wanted to make sure we got pretty accurate results. Let's take a look at test bench number 1. So the very first test bench we're looking at is my system, which is a Ryzen 7 2700X, a 2x16 gig kit of DDR4 Corsair Vengeance LPX. They're happen to be white. I have a Fractal Design Celsius S360, that is a 360 millimeter radiator, a Corsair 275R, that is my case, an Asus X470, it's the Pro motherboard, a Sapphire RX Vega 64, that is the Nitro Plus edition, an EVGA G3 650 watt 80 plus gold certified power supply, and my boot drive is an ADATA SU650. Now, it's really important to understand this specific test conditions as well as the other ones, and I'll cover that before each series of testings. So the CPU in every single test was overclocked to 4.2 gigahertz, 1.45 V-core, 1.2 volts on the SoC. Memory was running 3000 megahertz CL16 at 1.35 volts. The radiator was mounted in the front of the Corsair 275R, and it was done via push, so it was the intake fans. The case had one rear stock exhaust fan, so just one exhaust fan. The motherboard did use a custom fan curve that I had set up a while ago, and I did not change this for the testing. And the GPU has a standard curve, which is what I set up with almost every system, which is 20% all the way to 30 degrees Celsius, and then it ramps up to around 50% at 70 degrees Celsius, and there's a fair bit of a steeper ramp up at 80 degrees Celsius, so it does go up relatively quickly after that. So on the very first test we did Intel burn test, and the Fractal Design Venturi fans on the S360 actually lost by 1 degree Celsius. It actually technically won, but the room was 4 degrees Celsius warmer, so when you adjust it down to 20 degrees ambient, it actually did lose by 1 degree. This is a little bit of a shocker. This was a pretty big test in my opinion, probably the second most important test of all the ones that I did, and I really actually expected a 4 to 5 degrees Celsius loss on these particular fans, but we didn't. However, let's look at some more tests and see if maybe this was just a fluke. Now, always remember, lower is better. In this case, the adjusted peak temperature of both of them was 87 degrees Celsius. That was the maximum that we saw. The adjusted sustained load, so what we saw on average, the RGB fans actually won by 1 degree. That was kind of interesting. And the adjusted graphics card peak, which is important with IDA 64, because I'm using an open air cold graphics card, and I'm also using a radiator to bring, the heat into the case as well. That's important. Actually squeaked out a 2 degree win. So the RGB fans actually did win out. So interesting. Let's take a look at Cinebench. That's the last one for this particular series of tests. So it's important to understand how I do my Cinebench testing. What I do is I run each test with a minute cooldown until everything kind of fizzles out and then redo it. And then I average the test together. And what was interesting was the RGB fans actually posted a lower temperature and had a higher ambient temperature going to the test, which actually made a 5 degree difference. I did not see that coming. I really, really did not see these fans performing that well. That being said, there are some other tests we need to take a look at, so let's see what's on the plate next. So looking at the second results we're looking at right now, we're running an Core i5 6600K with a Deep Cool GameX 400. Do note we used the heatsink for every test, just changed out the fan, so keep that in mind. We're running an MSI Z170 PC Mate, a single 8 gig stick of DDR4 memory, an RX 550 just for purposes of getting something on the monitor, a power supply used for testing, EVGA 500 watt, and then SSD, the one I've been using the whole time, and the portable. So let's take a look at the conditions because that's going to be more important. Here are the testing conditions. So we are running 4.1 gigahertz, 1.3 volts on the core. We're running the GameX 400 heatsink for all the tests. PP means push-pull, otherwise it's just push. Memory is running a 2400 megahertz CL16, 1.2 volts, and we're using the stock motherboard fan curve. Do note that the motherboard has 2 CPU fan headers, and they're both running pretty much the same speed, plus or minus like 10 or 15 RPM. So let's take a look at the Intel burn test for all these fans. So this is interesting. We did Intel burn test. I did run some of these twice to make sure that we didn't have any outliers. The GameX 400 stock posted 69 degrees when adjusted to 20 degrees Celsius ambient. The GameX 400 with the Cooler Master ARGB fans, the air balance ones, in push did squeak out a slightly better wind, but it was a bit louder. Push-pull actually got another 2 degrees knocked off, but this is interesting. The PC Cooler RGB fans actually did better in push than the Cooler Master did in push-pull, and in push-pull, it actually beat out all of them. I didn't really really expect that. We have more to look at, but that was a bit surprising. This is the final test, and I would go to say this is the most important. So if you've been skimming over, not paying super close attention, pay attention to this one. The reason why is this is a relatively budget solution, and this is kind of where a lot of people are going to buy these fans. We're running a Core i3-8100 stock, a Cooler Master ML120L, so Master Liquid Light 120, the BioStar B360 board that I've had in this system forever, a single 8 gig stick of DDR4, the RX 570 from Power Color, the Red Dragon, a CX550M 80 plus bronze power supply. This is the kicker, the Cooler Master MB600L, which if you remember my review of It's Spicy, it doesn't really have good airflow, so it's really important. And then the boot SSD and the Samsung SSD, or Samsung external drive. So let's take a look at the conditions we worked in, and then we'll take a look at the really important test that we ran. Now, the CPU did run its stock. The memory was a 2400 megahertz CL16, so the XMP profile. What we did is we took the Lee & Lee fans versus the PC Cooler RGB fans. They're both RGB. We did 2 fans up front and push, and then we also did a fan on a radio push for exhaust. The motherboard also did have a stock fan curve, and the GPU ran the same exact fan curve as the other system. So that is the configuration. Let's take a look at the final set of fans that we're comparing. This one surprised me a bit. So the GPU, same temperature, which that didn't surprise me. It's well within margin of error. I did not expect a 5 degrees difference between the two set of fans. I believe they're priced very similar. The Lee & Lee fans obviously look nicer, don't get me wrong, because they're full, their fins are full plastic, clear RGB. But looking at the adjusted peak temperature of the CPU, 61 versus 66 degrees, adjusted at 20 degrees ambient temperature. And then the sustain was 62 to 51. Now, at these levels, it may not be as important, and these tests were run for 25 to 30 minutes, so they got about as hot as they would. But this is on a stock configuration with a 120 millimeter AIO in a case that doesn't vent particularly that well. Sure, either fans will work better, but the PC Cooler fans worked even better, and I think they come with a fair bit more. They're heavier, they're better made, and just an overall really, really, really good fan. So this isn't the outro, but I did want to show you guys what they look like. So I have it set on rainbow. It is full addressable as well if you do have a 5 volt header, which this only is 12 volt. But I am using the rainbow effect on the controller. And the controller can daisy chain as well. Very nice. Let's wrap this up. I'm sold. I really am. If I were to make one complaint, it's that the LED portion of it isn't super bright because it is a thin strip, but I think it does enough. I probably won't use them on a personal level for that reason, like my personal rig, but I'm definitely going to probably use these going forward. We have a HB600L, which has really bad intake. I'm not sure if you guys have seen me talk about it, but I wasn't a big fan of the review because the system ran a lot warmer than what I'd like. And that's kind of a problem. So when I put the Lee & Lee fans in, it ran a fair bit better as acceptable, but these posted a 5 degrees Celsius improvement. And being that these fans were probably about, well, I think MSRP, that these were probably about $20 or $30 less, that's definitely a win. Although, I mean, they're just not quite as bright, but I went into that kind of understanding that. So here is the too long didn't read. If these RGB styles, which has the thin strip around the edge, is enough RGB for you, I'm going to say buy these fans. Because they're not the highest pressurized, but to give you an idea, my Venturi fans actually did slightly worse, and they have a maximum 2.3 H2R per millimeter static pressure rating. I don't have the rating on these, but I would go to say at max RPM, which is 1800, and during my testing, these fans were about the same loudness as the Venturi fans, but not as loud as the Cooler Master fans. They were fine, and they produce probably a little bit more pressure, so you're probably looking at 1800 RPM, probably 2.5, 2.6. Then again, at the lower levels, I can't really tell you exactly, but they're honestly perfectly suitable for radiators and heat sinks. Obviously, if you want best in class, you're looking at HD 120s or ML 120s, but one of those costs more than this entire set. And Steve, me, is all about the budget solution. So I'm going to send you guys a direct link just to these fans only. Nothing else. The hardware is kind of interesting, but you guys just, I recommend these fans. If the color setup is for you, probably going to be the fans you're looking for. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you dislike, hit the dislike button. But leave a comment telling me why you didn't like it. Feel free to subscribe. In fact, I encourage it, because once I hit 1,000, I can actually start making money doing this. And buy these. They're good fans. Link in the description below. But as always, this is Steve from PC Budget Solutions. A huge thanks to PC Cooler, and I'll see y'all later on down the road.